new. Agus I can cordle le rod in sin na policy of vegan realtas shaw agus in realtas revision no cad agus bregu a hort a kisti international la hartista la greg gini a glasalama as an marigu. Agus Sinn Féin sin rún shaw as our gore tranoni new na jeru harlish and scanial shaw anish agus gujo. In May 2020, one of the state's leading wealth advisory firms circulated a paper. In that paper was circulated to potential investors in the Irish housing market. In it, the wealth advisory firm gave an honest and accurate account of government policy and its impact on renters and home ownership. It wrote in the paper, the current high level of house prices and rents in Ireland's residential property market have been driven in a significant way by the government's housing policy, with favourable policies attracting international investors in the market. They went on and said, the aim of institutions is to maximise their rental income from their properties, and developers are also designing apartment blocks to maximise this income for institutions rather than aiming to meet the needs of society. The investment advisory firm concluded accurately, in my view, when they said the current housing policy has benefited both institutions and developers at the expense of individual buyers. Now, that is the truth of this government's policy, and that isn't words according to me or according to Sinn Féin, but according to the industry itself, speaking to itself back in 2020. Last week, Roundhill Capital snapped up 135 homes in a new residential estate in Mullen Park in Maynooth, snatching home ownership from struggling home buyers who had worked hard to save for deposits. The week before, the same fund snapped up an entire estate of 112 homes in a new development, Bay Meadows in Dublin. For the public and for whole generations locked out of home ownership by this and previous governments, it was simply the last straw. The government is now scrambling to fix a problem that they created in the first place. And I've heard ministers try to claim that this is something new, that this is unintended consequences of government policy. But let me say this very clear, this is nothing new. It's been going on for years. In 2019 alone, Minister, developers sold off 2,909 newly built homes as private rental sales in Dublin. This meant that 57%, or 6 out of every 10 newly built homes in Dublin, were taken off the market and sold in the vast majority of cases to these investment funds. This is in 2019, not 2021. In the same year, over 3,000 second-hand homes were bought by these funds in 2019. So this isn't by accident. Indeed, it is by design. Government have facilitated and encouraged this policy. Many of these investment funds are REITs, Real Estate Investment Trusts, introduced by Fine Gael and the Labour Party in 2013 through legislation. They pay no corporation tax on their rental profit, they pay no capital gains tax when they sell the properties, and they pay little in the way of stamp duty. Many of their shareholders pay less tax on the dividends they receive than the average Irish worker does on his or her wages. Some of them actually pay none at all. These investments were given tax advantage by government. This motion, brought by the Dáil, by my party, calls for these tax advantages and exemptions to come to an end. Far from this being a new request by Sinn Féin, we've been calling for this to happen for years now. Only 6 months ago, I tabled amendments to the Finance Bill calling for the full rate of capital gains tax and a stamp duty surcharge to be applied to these funds, only for it to be voted against by Fine Gael, by Fianna Fáil and by the Greens. But now that the government have been caught out, they're scrambling to give some appearance of action, that they really wanted to do something. So I can call you, this motion calls on the government to take immediate action. It calls on them to introduce legislation to end the tax advantage and the exemptions that this and previous governments have given these investment funds, including REITs and IREFs. It calls for the introduction of the imposition of a stamp duty surcharge on the purchase of homes by investment funds, including REITs and IREFs, as proposed by Sinn Féin in our budget submission last year. And urgently, it calls for the introduction of measures to restrict the activity of these funds and to end their price gouging and the pushing out of struggling homeowners or buyers from the market. Investment funds are locking workers and families out of home ownership, and it's nothing new. It is not an accident. It's been happening for years. It's a direct result of government policy. Sinn Féin have been calling it out for years. It is now time to bring it to an end. So support this motion and stop funds making housing unaffordable.
Deputy Martin Kenny, please.
First of all, I want to commend Deputy Pearse Doherty and Deputy Owen O'Brien and others in Sinn Féin who have brought this issue to the forefront of the political debate over the past number of months and years. The reality is that what people saw in the last couple of weeks with these rates going in and buying whole housing estates is a reflection of what's been happening up and down the country. Many people have contacted me who have family members that are trying to buy homes. A man contacted me the other day in County Leitrim. He has 2 sons who he educated, who he paid for to go through college, who he had everything in his life he had to pay for. When his child was very sick, when they were young, they couldn't get a medical card, they had to pay, then they had to buy health insurance. He explained everything throughout all of his life. He is paying. And now, when these 2 sons who he has educated and who have very good jobs want to buy a house, they can't have no hope of affording it, because they would have to have a salary of probably between 100 and 120,000 per annum to buy a house in Dublin right now. And at the same time, the policies of this government is driving this whole agenda to what they call professionalise the rental sector. What they mean is to make the rental sector something which will make maximum profit for these big investment companies. And that is totally at odds with what the ordinary people of this country want. And Minister, it's time yourself and your government copped on to that. People are seeing what you are at. You are not working for the ordinary people of this country. You are working for the big investors, and you are working for the people who are in the inner classes. And that needs to end, and end now. The reality for many people is that they just simply cannot afford to live in this country. And that is bringing it home to so many. We have a situation today where people who have to go out and try and make a living and try and save to have a house, to buy something that they want to have for the future and for their own generations to come, and yet government closes that off for them. And it's down to your policies. It's down to the policies of Thatcher and Reagan. That's exactly where this comes from. It comes from their playbook, and that's exactly what you're following. This is not an accident or a consequence that you didn't foresee. This is exactly what your policy is driven toward doing. It's to make the whole housing sector a commodity that can be bought and sold, so that people will be slaves to it for the rest of their lives. Well, Minister, this needs to end. You need to support the motion that we bring before the Dáil here this evening, and you need to ensure that you act on this. Yesterday evening I watched the Claire Byrne show and I see Deputy Peter Burke fumble his way through it, try to come up with answers that nobody believed. And it's time that you copped on. People are seeing through you for what you're at now, and it's time that you absolutely come out and state clearly that you are going to drive these vultures out of the country. Michael Noonan invited them in. It's time for you to send them home. Gormila Baigov.
Teachta Denise Mitchell atá roint acud ama lena cud colacatha.
Gormahagad Cian Carla. Minister, our Sinn Féin motion stands up for young people. It puts young people and their right to buy a home ahead of developers and institutional investment funds. Your policies continue to fail young people caught up in this housing crisis that your government and previous Fine Gael governments have created. Minister, you said you had the solutions when you were in opposition. Now you're in government and you're continuing to do the same thing Fine Gael did. You're dancing to the tune of the developers and the investment funds. And Minister, you know this is wrong. Sure, you wrote a bill about it in the last Dáil, and tweaks and changes won't work. You need to ban these practices outright. You need to give young people a chance. You need to give them hope. People are angry, Minister, and they've every right to be. Your now famous parliamentary party meetings advised last week that Fianna Fáil are blaming Fine Gael and Fine Gael are blaming Fianna Fáil for this mess. The people know who's to blame, the both of you, as equal as each other. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been and always will be on the side of big developers. Your government can change this today. Surprise me and support this motion. I'll leave you with this, and I'll ask you, whom do we owe our allegiance today? The faceless men who, for mark and dollar, betray her to the highest bidder. Minister, I know where my allegiance sit. They sit with the young people all over this country who are desperate to own a home of their own.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Increasingly, the government and the last government has turned this state into a paradise for vulture funds. Contrary to what most ordinary people think, housing units are now viewed by this state as assets for the purpose of generating capital for investors ahead of the purpose of building homes for workers across this state. This may have come as a shock for many, too many after what we saw happen in Maynooth, but this has been a visible reality within communities across Dublin Bay South and right across the inner city Dublin for years now. First-time buyers from communities like Ringsend, Kevin Street, Harold's Cross, Rathmines and even Ranelagh are all too familiar with seeing the same faces at each viewing, buying up home after home for a third party on behalf of these investment funds. Dublin Bay South has traditionally not been a strong support base for Sinn Féin, but one of the key elements for Sinn Féin doing so well in the last general election was the government failure on housing. We had canvassers from Ranelagh and Rathmines, and we got votes in these areas because people are fed up with government housing policy. And anyone who thinks that the Fine Gael's success in the by-election is going to be a slam dunk is going to be in for a surprise, because the issue of housing has not gone away. Those who were shocked at what happened in Maynooth were silent when effectively the same has been happening in the inner city, pushing out working class communities, pushing out working class families right across the Docklands, where families had to watch their sons and daughters being pushed far out of their community and far away from the family and friends by these vulture funds and the big tech companies who rip the community apart. Once again, we see profit margins are allowed reign supreme over local communities. As very often the case is, these crises only seem to trigger outrage in the media when the issue transcends traditional class lines. Housing needs to be seen as a building block for community, not an asset to make financial profits from. Thanks.
No. Deputy Cullinan.
Ceann Comhairle. Minister, there is no consensus on housing, and we're certainly not at one on this issue. And how could we be when you consider the Fianna Fáil and the Fine Gael way? And ever since I've been involved in politics, I've seen Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael bail this state out of its responsibilities in terms of building social and affordable housing. You, Minister, and your government, and indeed Fine Gael when they were in government, have let ordinary working people who work hard, who want to own their own home, to the mercy of the market. You have made sure that the private housing market is what has come first. And the victims of that are the people who get up early in the morning and work until late in the evening, as they do, and they don't have any chance to be able to buy a home of their own because of the failures of your government. Your affordable housing plan lies in tatters because it didn't offer the solutions which were necessary. And you can shake your head, Minister, but the people out there in the real world who are victims of your government's housing policy and your failures know it to be the case. We don't have to convince them. They're telling us every single day of the week, people who don't have access to social homes and people who don't have access to affordable homes, and are seeing every single week house prices go up and rents go up. And those struggling families that we represent, that we give a voice to, are people who are paying huge amounts of their income on rent, far too much. They can't afford to save. And they're working people, working hard, where home ownership is now beyond them. And that's because of the failure of your government. Minister, in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's land, in the Ireland that you have built, we have a situation where landlords come before tenants. And we see it with rising rents year on year, month on month and week on week. We see in the past, and we see it again, banks being put first above people who own their own home and are in mortgage distress. And now we see vulture funds and institutional investors swooping in and buying properties that should be available for people who want to own their own home, and as a consequence, house prices are being pushed up. Minister, you have no idea what it is like for those people who are struggling out there, who want to own their own home, who need affordable homes. If you did, you would act. If you really wanted to take on these investor funds, you would. And it's come to a reality for me, and I've said this time and again, the only time, in my view, that people out there will get some relief and will see any substantial change in the delivery of social and affordable homes is when we don't have a government made up of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael who will put speculators and banks and vulture funds first, and when we have a finance minister in Pearse Doherty and a housing minister in Eoin Ó Broin. That's when we're going to see the substantial changes that people need and the homes that need to be built for those hard-working families.
Deputy Brady.
Thanks, Count Corla. The situation that the government has allowed to develop around housing is almost so horrific that it is difficult to believe that it's actually being allowed to happen here and now. And when it comes to Fianna Fáil and property developers, the phrase "catch me once" begins to form in the mind. But I think that the Irish public will agree with me when I say that Sinn Féin is delivering a clear message here today to Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and indeed the Green Party, that the Irish people will not allow themselves to be caught for a second time. For the shame in this belongs squarely at the door of the government. And let the message be clear and unambiguous. This government must put an immediate end to the sweetheart tax deals that have facilitated wealthy investment funds and gobbling up housing at the expense of ordinary people attempting to get on the property ladder. From the off, we have witnessed both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael defending the tax advantages that they have made available to these vulture funds which squeeze first-time buyers such as those as Mullen Park and Maynooth out of the market. And Glenveigh Properties is on course to secure over €60 million for the sale of 100 apartments at its Marina Village scheme in Greystones in my own constituency of Wicklow to the German investor Railus. In the rental sector in Wicklow, renters are being forced to pay an average rent of €1,324.68 a month, Minister, which alongside Kildare are the highest rents in the country outside of Dublin. And you, Minister, refuse to put in place rent caps to tackle that. And you have to ask the question as to why that is and who it actually suits. And the answer is quite simple. It suits your investor mates. And first-time buyers are being trapped in a purgatory of excessive rent from which they find it hard to believe that they will ever find a way out. If and when they can afford to purchase a home, it often results in them having to leave their own community in search of something affordable, because in your world, €400,000 is affordable in my county of Wicklow, and certainly that is not a world that ordinary working families live in. And these people, when forced out of their communities, they're leaving behind their family supports and their social fabrics of their communities. And this government is responsible for one of the worst social disasters in the history of the state, and the impact of which will most probably be felt for many decades to come. And it's shame on you, Minister, shame on your party, and shame on this entire government of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and your colleagues in the Green Party.
Deputy O'Snuddy.
There has been a housing crisis in this state for decades. It has many facets, and it has been presided over by this government and previous governments, and that's a fact that cannot be denied by this government or previous ones. They have presided over the chaos that the housing policy is in this state. They have facilitated developers continuously, year in, year out, decade after decade. And even when they went bang, they stepped in and bailed them out. And there's been many aspects to this, as I said, many facets to the housing crisis, but the latest is one which was predicted, you were warned about, and yet you took no action. You, in fact, facilitated and encouraged international REITs and IRFs to come in and invest in housing in Ireland. You went and you encouraged them to compete against the ordinary workers in this state who are trying their best to get the money together to have a deposit, first of all, to get the permissions to draw down a mortgage, and they build up their dreams, their dream home. So in some cases, they're the forever home, as they call them, or a starter home. And yet they go and they have everything in place, and what happens? The people that you have encouraged come in and underbid them or overbid them, because they offer sometimes 50, 60, 70 or even 80,000 per home over what the poor Irish taxpayer who is trying to buy these homes can afford. That is your policy. That is what you have stood over. So these people have been let down by you, and yet we hear your spokespeople saying there isn't a problem over the years. There is a in my area, ordinary workers are now being asked, because the market for a council house in Ballyfermot, for instance, is 300,000. Down the road in Crumlin, they're looking for 400,000. For an ordinary corporation house. There's nothing wrong with the area. What's wrong is the price, and the only people who have presided over that price is this government and previous government, who have encouraged multinationals to come in here and invest through the IRAs and the IRFs to ensure that the normal working people cannot afford them. Think, Minister, think to when you might have had only a few bob, where you were trying to get a home for yourself. Think even if you were trying to rent. The price for those same houses that I mentioned is $2,400 for a council house in Ballyfermot or in Crumlin a month. That is crazy. No ordinary worker can afford that. So you are saddling them with a huge debt. But not only that, you are now encouraging these firms to come in and invest in Irish property so that they can go off and get huge profits with no tax, no benefit to the Irish state and to Irish society. It is time for this to end.
Thank you, Deputy Funchion.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. First of all, I just want to commend my own colleagues, Deputy Doherty and also Deputy O'Brien, for all of their continuous work in relation to this issue. And in my time this evening, I'd like to talk about the impact of investment firms buying up large swathes of housing in Ireland from the perspective of young people, in particular those in their 20s. You know, it's a group that sometimes gets forgotten about, not just in relation to housing, but in relation to an awful lot of things in this country. The ESRI's Poverty, Income, Inequality and Living Standards in Ireland report, parts of which were published today, point to a significant share of young people facing excessive housing costs in comparison to their incomes. That won't come as a surprise to any of us. It examines the unique set of circumstances facing young people who are in the main engaged in insecure employment and who have been forced by successive failure in housing policies by both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments into a rental market with significant and acute affordability issues. I know housing affordability and availability is an issue that affects all age groups, but for young people, the prospect of home ownership has collapsed in recent decades. The findings paint a very stark picture of housing affordability for young people in Ireland in 2021. And the consequence of declining rates of home ownership for young people over several generations mean that these same young people are forced into the private rental market, where affordability has been aggravated by eye-watering high rents. Outside of the capital and rural areas such as my own constituency of both Carlow and Kilkenny, the private rental market has become increasingly unaffordable for many young people, and that's actually, if you can find a property to rent, it's nearly impossible to find a property to rent, impossible to afford it. They're in the region of €1,200 to €1,500 for Kilkenny and Carlow, and then forget about it if you're trying to find a place that will take HAP. You literally have no chance. And unfortunately, you know, and it's the reality, and you mightn't like it, Minister, you know, and you can have a go at us all you like, but everybody on the street knows the reality and the real consequences of allowing investment firms to buy up huge swathes of homes and newly built housing estates throughout the country. This is as a result, and this is what we're going to continue to see unless it stops now. Garmagat.
Margaret Nchakta Ruria Moraku.
Gurram Igot, Ken Corla. Look, Minister, we have a situation here with a housing policy that has failed. Now, we have heard many times in here of the consistent, constant failures over the years, of the failure to build council houses, the failure to build affordable cost rental, the failure to build affordable house that can be bought at affordable rates. Look, we have heard all the stories in recent days in relation to people who are paying absolutely extortionate rates of rent. Those that are lucky enough to avail of HAP and still have to put money with it. The absolute huge amount of money that we spend as a state on HAP. I think at the end, I think in 2020 it was in around 464.6 million euro. Like, this is absolutely crazy. Like, we have a situation at this point in time where we are on the side of IREFs and REITs, and we have facilitated them with tax breaks every which way. And it's all well and good saying that, right, the public expenditure can only cover X, Y, or Z. There are many means of drawing down money, whether that's European, whether that is private money, but it needs to deliver for people. We need to put a shape and structure in place that allows people to afford rents, to be able to buy affordable houses, and again, that we do produce these affordable cost rentals. And the system that we have at this point in time is utterly dysfunctional. It is not working for anybody. And see, to talk of the LDA being the solution when we talk about selling land to developers as opposed to using our land, and even if that's a case of getting developers to build on it to produce what we need to produce. And if we talk about an affordable housing scheme that talks about affordable houses at €450,000, where €450,000, where are we going? Like, everybody is being priced out of the market. We have a huge quotient of people who are going to miss their slot in relation to being able to buy houses. It's all well and good talking about, and we hear it from Fianna Fáil and from Fine Gael, that we are the party of delivering for home ownership. Well, you need to do it. I'm not overly concerned about anything from an ideological point of view, but let's be clear, what you've done to date has not worked. What you're planning to do is not going to work. And rather than snide comments, you'd be far better reading the real solutions that Eoin O'Brien and Pearse Doherty have put together. And we'll just stop the political backbiting, and we could deliver for our people, because we are failing them absolutely.
Minister, it was already hard enough for young people and people trying to start out and people trying to put together a home and try and have a home of their own. It was already hard enough trying to pull together a deposit with extortionate rents, with housing not being available in any of the right in anywhere near them and near their communities. It was already such a challenge for so many workers. Before that you and, like, I mean, you're making this argument here that you know, that this is an issue that's appeared overnight, that this is an issue that has just come to light. When you knew this was happening in so many communities around the state, and you wrote the rules to encourage them. And now workers who are paying rents that are through the roof are competing with these international funds that can buy up whole estates, that can gazump them completely. And it is soul-destroying for people of my age who feel that they have no hope of ever having a permanent home, for whom income limits for social housing haven't been changed in years. They don't qualify for that, very many of them. And the possibility of ever having their own home and ever having a mortgage is completely out of their reach. And some of this, like, I mean, some of the talk that's been there about the government delivering and that this is a key priority. And let there be no mistake, like, I mean, you know, we have supported many measures that have been productive and useful. But where they are failing, we will criticise them and we will make noises. And the bill that you have produced, it's not going to deliver. Your policies won't deliver. And I hear talk of affordable housing, and you're talking about up to 400,000 in Cork City. That's like Marie Antoinette and let them eat cake to people. It is just monopoly money for people. 400,000 for an affordable house in Cork City. It's not anywhere near the mark. It's beyond any imaginable reach for ordinary workers and families. So, Minister, this is one thing you need to do. There's an awful lot more, and it's focused on cost rental and public housing. But you need to ensure that the advantage and the incentives that you've given these funds are removed.
Minister O'Brien spent far more time in his speech misrepresenting Sinn Féin housing policy than he did addressing the issue at hand. And what's remarkable about that, of course, is when Minister O'Brien was in opposition, he was the archenemy of what he then called the cuckoo funds. He tabled legislation that he said would clip their wings, and he campaigned on an election manifesto that guaranteed action to ensure no single buyer could buy up blocks of homes that weren't intended for the build-to-rent sector. And yet, despite this staunch opposition to what he then called cuckoo funds, when the programme for government was negotiated, not a single mention of this issue. The minister must have forgotten, or he decided the promises he made to get elected were no longer valuable. And the only reason the minister and his colleague Pascal Donoghue are even considering this matter now is because of the huge public anger towards his failure and the failure of his government to keep their word. And I have to say, what people want is not bluff and bluster. They want action, and they will judge the minister by what he does. And with respect to the Minister for Finance, see, the difficulty is, by every single indicator, from the beginning of the 10 years of Fine Gael in government to the end, the housing crisis is worse. Homeless levels higher, rents higher, house prices higher. And now the Minister for Finance is right. If we're arguing that high-yield, short-term, speculative investment funds are the wrong kind of investment, then where will the money come from to build the homes? It's a very reasonable question, although the Minister knows we have answered this repeatedly. The first is the state needs to do far more than it is doing. Half of all of those social and affordable homes that are required should be fully funded by the state. Do what the ESRI said and double capital investment in public housing from 1.2 to 3 to 2.8 billion. But also, let us start attracting the right kind of private sector investment, not investment that leads to rents in Dublin city centre of 2,500 to 3,500, or that pushes house prices up to 350 to 450,000, because that's the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael way. Let's have more public investment and the right kind of private investment to deliver the homes that working people desperately need and rightly deserve.
Tonight, my constituency in North Kildare is reeling. The raid on houses by global wealth funds has left people stunned. Minister O'Brien, as Owen O'Brien just pointed out, has gone back on the Fianna Fáil manifesto. Instead of clipping wings, as was promised in your manifesto, you have given wings to the wealth funds, the Red Bull government. 135 homes scooped up out of 170. Fianna Fáil promised to ring-fence a miserly 30% for ordinary buyers, the workers who keep our economy going. In fact, you gifted the investors 79% in Mullen Park. This government might as well have walked up to Mullen Park and put a big sign up, "No mortgage holders need apply." Did you ever think we would see the day when you would need a war fund to buy a house, not in Monte Carlo, but in Maynooth in County Kildare? This is your doing, and it's your legacy. A housing market mutant, its priorities perverse. The full pamper package for the investors. The workers can go to hell. Not even the bank of Mammy and Daddy can save them now. They must be a good little tenant and pay the mortgage for the wealth fund investors. I commend Deputy Pearse Doherty and Owen O'Brien for this motion and their tireless work to seek to call a halt to the sweet deals and the pamper packages. Our PMB will also hit the cuckoos with a stamp duty surcharge in raiding residential property and put schmuck on their activities so they can't push people out of homes and install profit in their place. Because a home is not an option or a luxury for people. A home is essential. A roof over your head is one of our most basic needs. We need a radical rethink of our official attitude to housing, where a few privileged, pampered investors are deciding an awful lot of hard-working, unpampered young people can live. Now is the time for big government. A house is a home, not an investment, and big government will indeed save young people and couples falling through the cracks of this awful Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Green Party government.
Margaret, on Tachta Pierce Doherty in this.
Gurmaigad Cairley agus Boylan Buya Horta Ananya Laura and just Bracta New agus Gary and Chakti Delahog Takier on Runatas or Gore. I listened to the Minister for Housing, and to tell you the God's honest truth, if it wasn't as serious and if so many people hadn't had their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations dashed as a result of government policy, then it would be laughable. Here was a Fianna Fáil minister, himself an investor at the peak of the boom in relation to one of these funds, one of these REITs, and talking about the opposition in Sinn Féin and their slash and burn politics. This is the Minister of Fianna Fáil who, without a doubt, and I think it's well established, your policies fuelled the housing crisis. Your policies in the aftermath of the housing crisis slashed and burned the incomes of people right across the state, and unfortunately left many people with no option but to emigrate the country in which they were born in. Yet he lectures Sinn Féin without coming forward with any proposal of his own. He did take issue of us opposing opposing the shared equity scheme. And let me point out to the Minister, we're very proud that we're opposing your shared equity scheme. And let me explain it to him just in case he doesn't understand. The reason we do it are very simple. We believe it risks increasing house prices for people who are already locked out of the market. But don't take our word from it. The Department of Finance, the Department of Public Expenditure, the ESRI, and who else? The Central Bank have all warned you in relation to that scheme. And you can do your musical thing all you want, but people out there are suffering as a result of your policies and Fine Gael's policies, and that's the reality of it. And you might think it's a game in here, but it's no game for people who are paying sky-high rents, who are locked out of the property market. Now, Minister for Finance Pascal Donoghue, you would swear butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, and all he wants to do is make sure that people have a home. But since 2016, Minister, I have been telling you and warning you that the experiment with REITs and IREFs have failed in this country. I have told you that they are squeezing out first-time buyers and those who want to purchase their own home. I have told you they are dominating in the market, particularly in Dublin. And for the year of 2019, we see that 6 out of every 10 new homes that came on the market in Dublin, or that were sold in Dublin, didn't even come on the market. The funds snatched them up. And they snatched them up, and you know damn well why. Because you have created an environment which is tax-free, which incentivises this type of investment and this type of ownership. And those same funds then charge sky-high rents. Now, this government is adamant, because they're running round like headless chickens. The issue of Maynooth was a lightning rod for the people of this state, who are so angry at the fact that rents are so high. They are so angry that their sons and daughters are locked out of home ownership. They are so angry that there's no chance of any ordinary person owning a property in Dublin, or indeed the commuter belts. And they're so angry at the policies of this government, which is fuelling those type of policies, fuelling that scenario, and has encouraged and rolled out the red carpet to the vulture funds, which are benefiting and profiting off this situation. And Mullen Park was the lightning rod. But Mullen Park has been going on for ages in different estates. And the Minister is trying to now convince us that we need this investment so that the developers can actually build these estates. And he's conflating two different issues. These private rental sales don't fund the development. They don't give any money to the developer. All they do is they purchase the property at the end, and then they pay them. The developer gets the money from international finance, and there's no issue with that. And they get it from the banks, and they get it from other sources. But it's not the private rental sales that actually fund these developments. All they do is they come in at an early stage and say, we will buy them off you when they are finished, and then pay up. And that's been happening right across the board. It's not just Mullen Park and Maynooth just a couple of weeks ago. It's been happening in 2019. There was 2,909 new homes sold in private rental sales, mainly to these funds. 3,039 other homes that were second-hand homes. Minister, where was your outrage in terms of Portfolio 16? 765 homes sold to IRS rates in 2019. Project Vert, 385 homes sold in Leopardstown in June, again to the funds. Project Turner, 370 homes in 2019 sold to the funds. Houston South Quarter, 266 homes snatched up by the funds, locking out first-time buyers. Or Belgrave Fund, 222 homes, again 2019, snatched up by the funds, locking out and squeezing out first-time buyers. I could go on. I could name 42 other transactions, each of them totalling 5,700 homes, which the funds bought up in that year alone. And what did they do? It wasn't just that they bought them at market prices. They are pushing up the price. They're paying over 80,000 more than what is the market price, therefore creating a new ceiling, locking out people. But the Minister thinks this is okay, because the Minister thinks somehow 450,000 is affordable. You are living in cloud cuckoo land. This motion is something that we've been putting forward year on year in the Finance Bill. Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party just 6 months ago voted against even looking at the idea of additional stamp duty on these type of funds. You voted against even looking at it because you want the status quo. Now, because of the public anger, you're running around like headless chickens. There is proposals here that deals with this. You should support this motion and stop these funds from squeezing out first-time buyers.
Now that the debate has